Good morning. Anybody there?
Good morning.
Hi, Audra. How are you?
Hey, I'm good. How are
Wonderful
you?
to meet you. I'm great. Thank you so much for taking the time to do this. I really appreciate it.
Oh, I'm really excited to be here.
Of course, it's really exciting to get to talk to you today, but I wanted to see if we could start at the beginning and get a sense of where you're from. Can you tell me about growing up, what that was like, and what led you to the
Sure.
creative pursuit?
Well, I grew up in small town Iowa, and I've circled around a little bit and I've come back. So I'm living now where I grew up, in the house I grew up, which is interesting. I've always been interested in reading and writing and stories of all forms. My mother tells me that when I was 2 years old, I carried to her a pen and paper and had her write down my story that I have. I just wanted to tell a story and I wanted to have it written down, make a little book. And apparently, it was a story about a poor family who only had beans to eat. And so I'm like, oh, you know what? My stories have always been dark and depressing just from the get go. But kudos to my mother because she always kept books in the house and made books seem like the gems that they are. It always made it special. She signed us up for a book of the month club. I think I was like 3 years old and was getting books in the mail. And it was always such a fun thing to look forward to. And she knew they were coming on the day, when they were coming, and she'd have us go to the mailbox. And me and my sister, I have a sister who's 3 years older. And that was a big thing. We'd always go to our local library and we could check out as many books as we could hold, which was fun. So I get a whole stack up to my chin and precariously walk out of the library with those. And she read to us since we were infants and probably read to us when we were in the womb. And so stories were always precious to me. And her father, my grandfather, was also in the oral tradition of storytelling. He's from that era. He was born in the late, you know, 19 teens, over 100 years ago. And I remember him gathering us at his feet and telling us these fantastical stories. And when I think about them now, and I only remember a couple of them, unfortunately, they were terrifying. They're kind of like when you read Grimm's fairy tales now as an
Yeah.
adult and how absolutely terrifying those stories could be. But they were also fascinating, and kids just loved those things. We ate them up, and they were just fascinating. And the way he told stories, he was slow. He had this down. I tend to be a nervous, fast talker. And even in my readings, I tend to like blow through my stories. And, I feel like, did anybody actually hear anything? But he was so good at storytelling. He knew where to pause and he knew how to heighten the dramatic tension. And so that I think was integral to me as well, those two things together. And my sister was a big reader, so she always read to me as well.
Hmm.
I remember being in the bathtub and she read me the whole Oz series over, I don't know, a year or two probably. Just being in the bathtub, I'd soak and she would read me the stories. And I didn't become a reader till a little later in life. I don't know. I had a lot of energy. I still do. And so I was always outside running around, but I think I was gathering material as well. And then I started writing stories for our Barbies to act out. We had this whole soap opera. We had this whole room devoted to Barbies and their dramas, and they always were the same characters. I don't know if other people play with Barbies like this, but we gave them a name and character, and that was it for years. That's who
They
they
had
were.
their motivation, they had their character development, and
Yeah, yeah, it was so much fun. And so we wrote plays for them and fun things like that. And then I just started getting into writing stories at school and winning competitions. And I can't say it was a real stiff competition being in rural Iowa. There wasn't a whole lot of other writers out there. So, it wasn't like a lot of people were doing what I was doing. Going to writers conference, that was key. We used to have I don't know if they still have it for young writers, a young writers conference.
oh
I
wow.
remember going in fourth grade and it was at a local college. And to me, I was like, oh, something stirred inside of me. I'm like, oh, other people, I got to meet real writers.
Hmm.
And they talked to us as if we were adults. And, they weren't talking down to us. They were just talking about how to craft stories. And I lived for that event. It came once a year, and eventually they had to let other people go because I went so much, and they're like, okay, there's a couple other people we should probably let attend this. But that was important to me as well, to meet other writers at that time in my life, to know that people do this and take it seriously. Because even though my mother and my father, they knew entertainment was stories were important, I don't think they really thought writing was going to be a viable thing for me to do.
Mm.
Or I don't know. I don't know if they just didn't take me seriously, but I was like, I'm going to do this. And especially being in Iowa, I found out about the University of Iowa Writers Workshop. I think I was in 8th grade when I found out about them. I don't know why I was so late into knowing, but then I was like, oh, they're so close. I live about an hour away from Iowa City.
Yeah.
So the excitement was building here. And then I also found a best friend who was also a reader. And I remember going to her house, and her mother had a treasure trove of romance novels. And so we had free access to those, and those were wonderful. Those were great. So this is everything I'm taking in, and I'm kind of jumping around in this
No,
story.
this is great. Yeah.
Then a teacher, and this is always important as well, to find a teacher that encourages a person, a writer, a young writer. So I found her when I was in 9th grade. I think it was her first year teaching at my small school, Mrs. Veach. I still am in contact with her today.
Mm.
Um, she always read my stories, whether they were class assignments or not. Of course, I was writing all the time anyway. And she also treated me like an adult. And like the first time I saw those red pen markups on my story, I was like so offended. I'm like,
How
what?
dare you?
Yes, this is speech. I don't know if I like you anymore. But, she was teaching me and showing me. And so I would improve in those areas. And I still have a letter she wrote to me. I think I was about ready to graduate and I wanted to be a romance writer.
Mm.
And she's like, don't lose this. So many people have these passions and then they lose them, whether to life or whatever the passion goes out, or people talk you out of it,
Mm-hmm.
whatever, money, you need money. And so she's like, just don't lose this. You have something special. And so I held on to that. So went to the University of Iowa as an undergrad. And back then they didn't have, I think now they have a undergraduate writers program, maybe connected with the writers workshop, but not the graduate program.
Mm-hmm.
But back then they didn't. They just had the English department. And so, but I wanted to go there just to be around the writers workshop, just to rub elbows and just be in that environment. And it was fire, it was the best place to be. And however, unfortunately, I was the proverbial girl off the farm, fresh off the farm. So I was very excited to be up there and attending classes, but I was kind of a little more into the social aspect of college, which a lot of people do. But
Mm-hmm.
I was just so insulated, here on the farm in Iowa
Yeah.
that I hadn't experienced things and people and culture. And so I kind of went off on that path, exploring everything that I could there, but also getting, story information. And
Sure.
I used to be of the camp that I had to do things because
You
I
had to
would know.
experience life
Yeah,
too.
had experience so I could write about. That's not necessarily true. I don't recommend doing everything just so you could write about it later. But so, people are like, "Oh, I bet you learned so much." I'm like, I probably had the opportunity to learn a lot, but I didn't as much as I should have. And I would love to go back now at the age I
Yeah.
am now, go back to school and soak it all up. But just to be around the writers workshop was great. And the best thing that happened to me, am I rambling too
No,
much?
no, I was just going to comment on something real quick because it's so interesting and I hadn't thought about it. This feeling that you're coming out into the world and you have a plan that is so well thought out, like a dream. You're fulfilling that dream, you're following that goal, but then you're almost caught off guard by the adult world, the real world. Having just
Yes.
kind of like a buffet of experience at that age is almost disorienting. And I just truly empathize with that because I come from a very small town. And when I went to college, it wasn't even a big city or anything, but it was like I got this other stuff to experience. But I'm sorry to cut you off. That was just a really
No,
great, yeah.
yeah, that's exactly what it was. It was just like it's like the Wizard of Oz going from the gray world into this color, technicolor. It was
Yeah.
just foods and people, and it was amazing. I loved it. I loved every bit of it. Oh, so the writer's workshop. This is
Yeah.
before they were in their die house that they have a house now that they've been, but here they were in the what we call the EPB, English Philosophy Building.
Mm.
They were on a certain floor. And one day I got lost looking for my class, first day of classes, and I opened up this door, and it was like the door to Narnia. It was apparently hooked onto the writer's workshop, and it was a closet. And on it were all the shelves of stories that I guess the graduate students were writing. This is
Mm.
before you could share things on computers and internet. So they actually manually printed out their stories, copies, and they put them on these shelves, apparently. And this is where other classmates would come in and they'd gather their stories to read for the week. Well, I feel ashamed, but I had to do some pilfering because I'm like, this is it. This is the Holy Grail. So I would go in there weekly. I'm so sorry. University of Iowa Writers Workshop. And I would gather stories and then take them home and devour them.
Mm.
And so I did my own little writer's workshop.
Interesting.
Of course, I took creative writing classes while I was there and playwriting, but I learned a lot from those manuscripts.
Mm.
But you know what? The interesting thing was they were not very good. But that was good for me to know that these were also people who their first drafts weren't diamonds.
Yeah. You felt like you had seen that even people at sometimes a higher level had to put in some work and some effort. They were fallible in
Yeah,
some way, and the pedestal seemed, approachable in some way.
it did. It did. It gave me hope. And it's like, okay, and they were obviously better than what I was writing, but they weren't like publishable, I don't think, in my opinion,
Mm.
at that point. But they weren't supposed to be. They were early drafts. But, as my young mind, I was expecting them to be perfect, these
Hmm.
stories, and they weren't. And so I was like, oh, okay, now I can see I have room to grow, and you don't have to be perfect to go to the next level. You just have to be willing to learn, I think, and putting it out there and being bold enough to put it out there because it's hard. It's hard to get
Hmm.
workshopped. It's hard,
Yeah.
to have people look at your things and get that red pen, Mrs. Beach.
So, when you were in school, then were you able to maintain any kind of writing process, or were you just still kind of out and about trying to experience as much as possible, or did you feel like that was a lesson that came to you later, one of consistency, one of just constantly writing?
Much later. Like for those classes that I took, I wrote the stories like the night before, just like a typical college person. And but I still was learning in those classes, reading other people's and things like that. And of course, the reading that they assigned was really good. The published stories that they assigned us were a study in themselves.
Yeah.
So no, I kind of abandoned writing for a while after
Mm.
school. I wanted to apply for an MFA after I graduated, but I met the love of my life.
Ah,
And
yes.
so, things went in different directions for a while, and, writing just didn't matter anymore. So I did get married and, to a man who was in the Air Force, so I got to move out of Iowa, travel around a little
Oh,
bit,
yeah.
see the world some more. And you know what? I'm really glad I didn't do a lot of writing when I was younger because it wasn't gonna be any good. It was just
Mm.
sex-fueled stories
The
that really
younger
didn't have any.
perspective, yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
It
and just like jealousies and this just things laughable. I would be so embarrassed if they were published now. And my writing was just my style. It wasn't very good back then. So I'm really glad nothing was published early on. So yeah, then I gathered, life experience.
So when do you feel like you can go back to writing? At what point do you make that decision, or is it an organic thing that just starts happening way later on in life, or whenabouts does that
I
happen?
think that the itch started about 10 years later after
Mm.
graduating. I did have a daughter 3 years into our marriage. She has autism.
Mhm.
And back then, there was just no support. She's 23 now.
Mm.
And that just railroaded me in a lot of ways. And so just life turned upside down for me.
Yeah.
And so everything stopped, writing, reading, just everything. And my focus was on her. And I'm glad for it. But it was just, it interrupted. And people have things in their lives all the time, it could be one thing or another. That just is my thing that
Hmm.
took my focus. So about 10 years later, life started evening out a little bit and I'm getting the itch again. So I did start writing. My husband bought me a laptop. They were so expensive back then. I was just so mad at him too. I'm like, I don't need this. I need pen and paper. I'm okay. But he's very supportive, and it was great. But I was still kind of mad about that. And then I started writing, but it was slow. It was slow, and yeah. But
Yeah.
it's been picking up.
So when do you find flash fiction above anything else? Because I imagine that you were looking to do more long form, or did you ever dabble in other mediums before you landed in flash fiction in particular?
I've always written really short stories before I knew what they were. I don't think I've ever written a story over, I want to say over 1,000 words, but maybe probably around the 1,200, maybe 1,500 word was the most I've ever written. I just
Hmm.
didn't have any more to say. And it was harder in the earlier years, like mid 2000s. I didn't know what flash fiction was, and I couldn't find a place. I'd won a contest, and there was a big brouhaha over it because some of the judges thought this wasn't a story. It was like
Mm.
maybe 500 words. It was a story, but I guess they just didn't think it was long enough. And I'm like, well, so that was a problem. But I ended up the award gave me the award because there was a couple judges there that said, yes, this is a story, just not traditional long story. So I was coming up against some of that. And then
Mhm.
the self-doubt would come in. I'm like, oh, this isn't, people don't think this is a story.
Mm.
And so I tried to write long and it just never worked. And just finding venues at first was hard because internet was still kind of new and
Yeah.
finding places that would take it. Most of them's like, well, we take short stories between 1,000 and whatever,
Yeah, it was like
and I'm
10
like,
and 5 or something. 10 and yeah.
yeah. So I was just floundering for a while, but then flash fiction took off.
Yeah.
Yeah, found my
Especially with
place.
the internet. I mean, this was still kind of a ways out before the online literary community felt like it was gelling. And at least for me, it feels like Twitter and a lot of these social media platforms allowed for those avenues to kind of proliferate.
Yeah,
But what did you do before that happening? Because that must have been what, like 8 years ago or something like that, that we got the online lit community as it is now. Because I don't
yeah.
remember it being like that before in this.
I joined like Twitter in 2013, and that's when things really
Mm,
picked up for me, just finding
okay.
out about the community, as you said. So before that, it was a bit of a floundering. I happen to find some anthologies every once in a while. Like I think it was called Sudden Fiction. There's a
Yeah,
few
that's they used to call it. Yeah.
anthologies. So that was like, oh, Lifeline. And I would study those as a Bible and see who these writers were and where they were published. And, just felt like I was out on my own and didn't have any connections. I had a couple local writing groups that I was in, but no one was writing what I
Mhm.
was writing.
Mm.
So yes. And then I had a friend, Jason Zwiker, who told me to get on Twitter. And I was like, no, 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 no. As you can tell, I'm anti-technology because, I'm like, no, I don't. Like, I don't need that. I don't need that. I was already on Facebook and not liking it. So I was like, no. He goes, no, Twitter's different. Twitter's different. Boy, it was different. Yes, I got connected with other people who loved what I was writing and I loved what they were writing. And like you said, the magazines, the submission calls, just the community, the sharing, the Twitter community until recently,
Of course.
yeah, it was the best thing that could happen to me as a writer, honestly.
Mm. And at that point, were you back in Iowa, or were you still kind of going all over the place?
That's really the year that I moved back. I moved back in
Oh,
2012.
okay.
So everything was coming together for me.
There is a period of deep exploration that just kind of takes you to where maybe you didn't think you would ever go. But then it's almost like you end up longing for home base of some kind, for some kind of center, and I feel like that sometimes you just got to go home.
Yeah.
So when do you feel like you start hitting your rhythm as a writer in this process throughout, throughout this experience? Can you remember a time when things started gelling in that way?
Yes. Right before I moved here, I had written a story that I felt like I finally found my voice, and that was pivotal. Before, you kind of, well, I say you, but I'm talking about
Sure,
me,
sure.
imitate for a number of years. Most writers, a lot of writers, you
Hmm.
just kind of read and imitate. And some people find their voice really early, but as I said, it took me a while. So I was going to enter another contest, and deadline was looming, and I had what I really liked the story. This it was short story, flash fiction, but I felt like I had the scenes that I wanted, and then I've had some holes, and I was like, I gotta fill these holes,
Hmm.
and I was just up against the wall, just trying to figure out how to fill this, connect these scenes, and then I don't know what happened, just this epiphany. I'm like, you know what? I don't think I have to connect them.
Mm.
I think these scenes can just work as a story together, and you can make these leaps. Because I was in the thinking that a story, because I hadn't read a whole lot of flash fiction, had to be A B C D E F G all the way to Z, and I
Mm.
had maybe A and G and M, S and Q and Z, and I had to figure out how to get the other letters. And then I'm like, but the deadline was like close. I'm like, I think I can just do this. I think this works. So, and I won, and it was,
Oh,
and my
wow.
voice was there, and it was just a wonderful time for me. It's like a boosting, like, okay, this is, I think I know how I'm going to do this now.
Mm.
And if now reading a lot of Flash, yes, it's much experimentation and nonlinear and a lot of, you know, inference going on and implication. And
Mhm.
yeah, I've learned that. But that was the first time I did it on my own and didn't know what I was doing and landed on it. So, okay, so speed up a couple years into where the Twitter community, um, I found a writer named Kathy Fish, and she's very famous in the flash fiction world. I think I read a story of hers and that I really liked, and then just dug a little deeper. And she happened to be putting out a call for, she was going to start like a class on flash fiction, and she wanted to do like a practice class. So she goes, it's for free. If you want to sign up, I'll do a practice class. So I signed up for that. And that was not only when the instruction was phenomenal, and now she's famous for her classes, but I met my core group of flash fiction cohorts in this class. So I made my connections in her class, and we're still in touch today. And that was like, that might have been, I don't know, early teens, 2000 teens. And
Mhm.
so that was a good thing for me to have friends in the community, like actual people that I can talk to
Yeah.
on a regular basis.
Yeah.
And we could exchange stories and opportunities. And so that's when things started taking off.
Oh, that's amazing. And it feels like everything goes hand in hand. You get the community support, they start inspiring you or giving you feedback, and then immediately you get a bit of an engine to continue to be producing. Can you tell me where you felt your work was? If we could elaborate on that a little bit more, and what was missing, what other pieces did you feel were missing in the way that you worked or saw the world? Even if it's something like process related, is
Mhm.
there some things that you do now that make your work better that you didn't used to do before?
You know, yeah, that's an excellent question. And I wish I had an excellent answer. For me, this is me. I go in waves. I go up and down. I've noticed. At least I've written long enough to know that about myself.
Mm.
Like once I had that breakthrough story, I thought writing's going to be a piece of cake after that. I got it. I've unlocked it. No, no, the next stories after that were terrible, you know, terrible. So, what I have learned about process for me is that every story is different. Every creative project is different. And
Mm.
I still try to put it into this box of this is how I want it to work, and this is how I want it to come out. I want to be able to do a story in a few days, a draft,
Mhm.
a full draft, and then come back and edit, and then have a finished product, and just keep it going like an assembly line. Some people might be able to do that. I I'm not, and I have to tell myself this all the time, that just to let it come organically on its own. I love deadlines. I don't always meet deadlines. I put deadlines on myself to help, but I don't always meet them. And I still, okay, I won't say I used to. I still beat myself up, when I miss a deadline for something that I wanted to do. But, I can't put out something that I'm not proud of. I have to have a product that I'm proud of. Actually, I did force a story out just recently. I just got an acceptance for it. And I'm not proud of it. And I almost feel it, just want to
Mm,
take it back.
I see. There might have been something missing. You're like, "No, not yet, not yet. Can you give me another
Yeah,
another rewrite?"
I should hold on to it. The ending's not right for me.
Mm,
And but there is this is the downside of Twitter and social media. You do feel the pressure to produce,
yeah,
to keep up,
yeah.
to you compare yourself a lot. And we all know we shouldn't, and we all know it's just unfair to ourselves, but I think it's just we can't help it, you
It's
know?
it's so human. I mean, I look in there and every other line is, "I'm so happy that I finished this. I've been accepted to this." But I feel like maybe we should focus on sharing the difficulties, and which, I think depending on who you follow and depending on what the algorithm is telling you, maybe you can get some more of that. But I wanted to take a moment to talk a bit about your latest collection. Thank you for sending that along so I could take a look at it.
Mm,
I really can't thank you for giving me this experience because it is so emotional in a way. And one of the things that I appreciated about your collection, which is Hush Hush Hush, there is it feels like you know how to pack a punch with what you have. Like you know that you're not stretching anything out. You're putting in as much as humanly possible, whether it's through character or dialogue or cadence, whatever it is. And I had a really wonderful time reading it. So I really want to thank you for letting me read that. It was great.
thank
Um,
you.
can you tell me a bit about how this collection comes together for you, and what is that process to assemble a work like this?
That is a lot of my work, like most of it. There's only a few stories that I've written, flash fictions, that aren't in there. So I'm not a prolific writer. I publish maybe 1 to 2 stories a year.
Hmm.
I had a little flurry there earlier, but things have slowed down. So, well, I had another child, but I picked out what I thought was kind of a theme in these. Most of my stories are written from a child's perspective. Um, I've got a couple that aren't, but maybe they're about children. And so I wanted that theme. I wanted the children theme, and the hush hush hush. I noticed, you don't really think about. There I go. You saying you. I never thought about myself as having themes as a writer, or I didn't see any connections really between them until I started thinking, I wonder if I have enough for a little chapbook here. And then I started looking at it. I'm like, oh, you know what? I've got some deep, dark issues. And I could see that thread going through, I'm like, oh, it's, I can't, there's some famous writer that says that we write, as writers, we write the same story. We just
Yeah,
write it over and over and over and over again.
right.
And I'm like, oh, that's me. It's the same thing, just written a little different, somehow come out a little different. But so then I thought, okay, these link up pretty well together. And I've noticed I use the word hush in a few of the stories, and one ends saying hush, hush, hush at the end. And I'm like, okay, you know what? That's kind of what my theme is, I think. Readers might see something else. I think readers always see something else. But as a writer, I was like, okay, I think I have these children that want to say things, that want to speak about these injustices, this emotional violence that's happening, and they just can't. They don't have a voice. They're not adults. They can't speak. So that was my unifying thing. So I think most people, when they put the collection together, look for things most of the time that have a theme that kind of connect.
Right. the closing story that you had was really moving because there was this idea of faith and um, if you could elaborate on that last story of the collection, which has a great name as well, and it's so long and beautiful that I can't think of it right
You
now.
know what?
But
Sometimes I have to look it up too because I feel like I can't get it all right. Where's my copy of this?
it's the one when the
When the
pregnant girls.
when the pregnant girls first arrived at St. Eulalia's home for the lost and wayward. There we
Oh,
go.
wonderful! What a
I
great title.
have to think.
I'm such a sucker for excellent titles that give us just a wide sense of what is happening, right then and there. But the origins of that one.
I wish there was just a wonderful story behind this, but I was an editor at New Flash Fiction Review, and every December we did like an editor issue where we all wrote stories. That was tremendous pressure for me. And we decided to use a photo. There's a word for that, ekphrastic
Ekphrastic?
writing.
Yeah.
And so there was a black and white photo of a kid like on ice, like playing, but since it's a photograph, he was frozen in time.
Mm.
And I'm like, oh, no. I go, someone's going to write about a kid falling through the ice. I can't do that. Someone's going to write about, parents ice fishing. I was just like, I got to get something that someone else is not going to do because we all had this picture. And so I really thought about it for too long. And first I started out with a father son, and they'd go to this pond and he would just tell them a cautionary tale. I always get stuck in wanting to do cautionary tales. And I'm like, I know we can't do that. So then I don't know how it just came together. I'm like, oh, you know what? This is like I don't know. What if it is kind of a cautionary tale in a way, but I don't know. I don't know how I landed on the whole pregnant girls at St. Eulalia's. Oh, but you know what? I'm a fan of Karen Russell short story writing. And now that I think about it, she has this story about these werewolves. St. Lucy's home for girls raised by wolves.
Mm.
That was probably running through my mind
I see.
at the time. So I didn't really mean to say as much as I did. This was totally just a struggle for me to write, and I didn't know what I was
Mm.
saying. This was one of the hardest ones for me to write.
Yeah.
I did something here in this story, and I also did it in the first story, that this is kind of a trick I do when I'm stuck writing. I'm giving away my gold
All
here.
right, let's go.
I end a sentence with an image or a word, and then I'll start the next sentence with that image or word.
Mm.
And some people pick up on it and some people don't. I hope they don't, but if they do, it's okay. So, like, when the pregnant girls first arrive at St. Eulalia's home for the lost and wayward, the nuns take them to see the frozen child, period. The frozen child, her feet locked in ice, her mouth wide and dark as an open grave, period. The grave is never satisfied, say the nuns, neither is the barren womb nor the eyes of man.
Mm.
And so it just keeps going like that. And that, when I'm stuck, is a great way to get me going.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
a lot of times it doesn't work, and I don't want to overdo it either, but in this one it was helping me to get unstuck because I had this
Yeah.
deadline. I got to put a story in. And then you know how it is sometimes when you tap into the flow. Once you hit that, and you open up, and that's rare for me. It's very rare, but I had a couple beta readers that were reading this as it was going, and they're like, I think this is going to be good. Keep going, keep going. I'm like, I can't. Like running a marathon.
It's like this as far as I can go.
Yeah. And so I stopped after the first paragraph, and they're like, no, yeah, it's all right. I'm like, okay, I think there's more. Okay.
Mm.
So thank you, beta readers. But so I just kept going with that, and finally, it just all came together. It's just one of those magic moments
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
writing that are so rare. I think I've only had that happen one other time where it was just hard work, but
Uh-huh.
somehow it just all magically falls in place.
That's beautiful though, because when that does happen, it feels like a lot of elements that you've acquired over the years have just really decided to come out at the same time and have that kind of I don't want to say synergy, but it is like these things are just kind of binding together and coming out at the right time. But do you ever look back at your work and start uncovering more themes that, that maybe subconsciously were there? There was a lot of conversation in some of these works about nature, about our place in the world, it seemed like. At least that was some of the things that I took, maybe because of, I don't know, being from a small town where you're surrounded by nature. And so, like, that's sort of one of those things that I naturally go to when I'm reading something that sticks out to me. Um,
Yeah, yeah. I think probably just living on a farm, and I basically lived in the woods, as a kid in the 80s. Yeah, I don't really ever consciously like put, themes or things in there. They just kind of eke out and like that. I've never thought about that. You're pointing that out to me for the first time. I'm like,
oh,
oh yeah,
okay.
that might be in there. That probably is in there. But yeah, I didn't consciously do that.
So, for my curiosity here, when you finish a draft, how do you know that it's finished? I mean, we may know that, yeah, it has some more work to do, but what feels like it's a completed draft when you're working?
Um, I feel a good bit of it's done when I get the last line or last couple lines, and I usually get those before I've got the whole thing finished, fleshed
Mm,
out.
mm,
I feel really good, like that's locked in there. When I get that, I'm like, okay, now I have a point where I'm running to.
mhm.
I can see the finish line. So then it just feels good. But if I don't get that line, and sometimes I still have some works that's just never showed up. And like this one I said that I just is getting published. Oh, I'm disappointed in myself. But usually I get that last line and it's just like there's actual a physical reaction I have.
Mm.
I do photography too, and I
Oh,
do
okay.
like double exposure photography. And people ask me about that too. And I said, there's just and I do a lot of like snapseed work, you can do color and do
Yeah.
fun stuff. And I said, I know when that photograph is done, when I have a visceral physical
Mm.
jump inside of me. It's like a jump. I'm like, oh, okay,
Yeah.
that's just right. It's done. It's kind of the same way with the stories too. I get that little, when I get the last line, I get that, with that line, if there's no excitement for the writer, there's no excitement for the reader.
Uh-huh.
So I have to get that excitement for myself. Like, okay, that's it. And then I can usually get the rest kind of tinkered out.
Oh, that's wonderful. I think that to do a variety of different forms allows you to sharpen that muscle of intuition. Like, I think that we may study craft as much as humanly possible, but I think it kind of ultimately comes down to that feeling, right? That gut instinct that says, yes, no, a little bit more. Okay, step back, take a chill pill, or keep going. But a couple more questions to be mindful of
Yeah.
your time here. But I can't thank you enough for taking the time to do this. Can you describe the process of working on a manuscript that is going to go into publication? Like, how much work did you have to do after this was accepted for publication? What was the relationship like with the editor and the editing process?
That's a good question. It's always a mystery. Like this is my first and only, book published. So, I had my thoughts of what was going to happen, and it was lovely. Allison Blevins of Small Harbor Publishing. Yeah, what the neat thing was she really fell in love with my work, and that's what I really stress, that you find someone to publish who really loves your work as much as you do, or more,
Mm,
probably more than what you do. Um, I was so glad to have a connection with her because I had entered it in a couple contests and got some nibbles, but I was like, okay, well, maybe I don't know. I set it aside for a while and then dug it back out. And then to have her respond so enthusiastically was wonderful. So she liked the order that I had them in because I did think about that, doing, what order I wanted them in. And then she just did a line by line, edit and
mm.
tighten some things up because some of these are old and I've learned some things. I'm not that good at punctuation and grammar. That's what when I was at the University of Iowa, I should have paid attention, but so she tightened things up that needed fixing. And I wish more editors did that in like literary magazines. I wish they did line edits.
Mm.
I like them. even though you said I hate the red pen, but I don't mind it in that form, you know,
Yeah.
taking out the commas I put in. And she also taught me about using ing words like gerunds. I don't know if it's so much. I think gerunds, like nouns, skiing down the hill and things
Mm.
like that. It's her opinion, and at first it was hard for me to listen to this, but she's like, you can make it stronger with, just putting it in more present tense. And I'm like, but I had so many ing words in there. I was like, what? So I think I kept a couple, but she talked me into putting those more into present tense. And also, Hillary Leftwich, she has an editing service, and she looked this over before I submitted it,
Mm.
and she gave me some strong suggestions too. And so I took those to heart. And you don't have to do it everything everyone says, but when it gets down to it, after your feelings, are hurt and you rebound, you're like, okay, where they're right. But there's some places I fought for. I'm like, no, I really like this here, and I'm going to keep it here because I like it. And both Hillary and Allison were fine. If I love something, leave it alone. That's okay. But so that was a neat process, and I did enjoy that back and forth.
May I ask, what is on the horizon right now? What are you looking to do in terms of the next creative endeavor that you have lined up?
Well, actually, I feel like I have to hush this. I want to go into playwriting.
Yes.
Playwriting.
Let's go. Woo.
So I do have a project that I have started, and I got the engine behind it. Like you said earlier, I'm just so excited about it. But I can't talk about it because I think I might have to get rights for it. I think it's about some real life people that lived. And so probably not my best choice for a first play.
But it calls you and you got to dive in. It's amazing.
Yes, it may not see the light of day, but I have to write it for me because it's just got me excited. But I'm
Oh,
still always going to do Flash. And I sit down and kind of go over my Word documents and see what gives me the heat for the day, what's calling me. And so I always have Flash there. And when I get stuck in the play, I dabble with the Flash or I go back and forth. But the play, I want to go back to playwriting.
that makes me very happy because playwriting is the most rewarding thing. I love it so much, and it just brings me so much joy that there's somebody out there who is embarking on that, whether it's the next project or a skit, whatever it is. That makes me tremendously happy. So I wish you the best on that. It's going to be great.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I
Thank
hope
you.
that I get to hear more about it when it gets out into the world, if it does, or even, no matter what happens. I'd love to chat with you about playwriting some more.
Awesome. I'll take you up on that.
Yeah. So lastly, two more, and then I'll let you enjoy your Sunday. What's something that is really taking your breath away recently creatively, whether it's a play or some writing or works that you're experiencing on TV or music, anything like that?
Oh, goodness. So much. I just stumbled on this writer that I feel ashamed that I didn't know of her before. Her name's, I don't have her book right next to me, Leonora Carrington. And I've just read a few of her stories. I ordered her book, and she was, I believe, a Mexican kind of surrealist painter, kind of back, maybe like in the Frida Kahlo, maybe in that era, maybe a little bit before. But she was a painter, and she also wrote. And oh man, her stories are just like, they seem so relevant for today. It seems like something I would open up in a lit mag and read today. They're so bizarre, but so awesome at the same time. I really like bizarro stuff. I like it. And I read this short story by Lynn Mundell, flash fiction. And I think it was published at this great lit mag. I love this name, The Disappointed Housewife. And it was a recent publication. It was called, I think, The Centaur at the Laundromat.
Mm, that's right
Something,
up my alley. I love that so much.
yeah. So go to The Disappointed Housewife, Lynn Mundell, something about centaurs in the laundromat. That's just my jam. That story right there is just like perfect for me. Yeah. So that's got me going. And I'm rereading Shirley Jackson and
Mm,
Flannery O'Connor, just going back to the old stuff that
hmm.
I read a little bit of in college, but didn't do a deep dive. Now I'm like diving in.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's great. Thank you for that recommendation. I am going to check that out immediately. Sounds wonderful. And lastly, this is something that I always ask people because I'm curious of it myself. Um, how do you quantify success as a writer, as a creative soul, artistic soul in your day to day? Because I know, as we've talked about, it's really hard to keep things going sometimes because there's life and other things happening. But if there is, something that you've thought about that makes it easier.
Um, the bar keeps moving, unfortunately. I don't know if we're all like this. I thought once I had the chat book out, that would be it for me. I could die and be happy. But now, now I just want more and I want another chat book, or I want to do a full length collection, or it just keeps moving. I don't think I'm ever satisfied with myself. And my husband gets so mad at me about it. Stop and enjoy this, enjoy this moment. You had this thing out. And I'm like, you know what? This is my old stuff. I'm on to the new. And so he has to slow me down a lot. So, but I really, if I just look at myself in the mirror every day, as long as I'm still getting out at the keyboard or getting my notebook and doing something every day, I try to do it. That is success because I just, like you said, it's hard. It's hard to find time. And I think as long as I'm just still working it, I'm going to be 50 next year. And there's so much more I want to do. And I get frustrated sometimes with what I haven't done yet.
Mhm.
It's like, oh, I should have been really working harder at this. But, with age, you start evaluating things and looking at things and being a little gentler with yourself if possible. And I'm like, you know what? As long as I keep at it, things are going to happen. Things are going to get written. Things are going to get published eventually. It will happen. As long as you just keep turning your wheels. And that is success when you don't give up.
Mm.
Because there was times I have. And you know what? Every time I did, it didn't last long, thank God. But, something always usually happened right after that. That kept
Yeah.
me going. Like someone would contact me. Oh, I liked your story. Da, 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 da. I'm like, oh, really? Oh, okay. Maybe I should keep going. Self-doubt is awful, but just, I think, keep going. And I think if you have that passion, like you said, like your playwriting, it's just so special to you. Even if I just write for myself,
Mm.
which I try to do every story. I try to say, just write something that I would want to read, something that gives me pleasure. Um,
Yeah.
that's success, I think, too.
Oh, that's a beautiful note to end on. That's wonderful. And Audra, I can't thank you enough. I feel like we just scratched the surface. So hopefully we'll be able to chat a little bit more down the road. Once you get some more work out, happy to connect again. But I want to thank you for this wonderful work that you've written. Hush, Hush, Hush was a really moving collection that packs a punch. As a chapbook is a really, really impressive thing. And I want to thank you for your honesty and for sharing the darkness and how to contrast it with a beautiful way of living. So, yeah, this has been such
Oh,
a pleasure.
for me, too. This was an amazing experience to talk. I didn't think I could talk this long. I really was worried about it.
we
I was
never
like,
we never think we can, but something happens. Some magic
yeah,
happens.
the magic happened. Thank you for bringing the magic. I appreciate it. This was fun.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, I will be in touch real soon, and I hope you have a wonderful Sunday. Wish you the best.
Thank you. You too.
Bye.
Bye bye.